Okay, we'll call our meeting to order and begin with the superintendent's report.
Well, thank you, Skip. Welcome, everyone. Good evening. And for those of you watching the live stream, thank you for joining tonight. Just a couple of things on my report. We held our annual retirement reception this evening at 6 o'clock to recognize 11 of our employees who are retiring at the end of this school year. And I just want to thank all of our VCS retirees for their service, dedication, and commitment to our precious students and community over the years. We refer to our staff as our VCS family, and they will always be a part of our cherished VCS family. They will be missed, and I hope retirement is all they imagined it to be. And congratulations to our newest retirees. As you know, the 21-22 school year ended this past Friday, June 10th. Happy to report that summer school and summer services at all levels start this week, and we are excited about the learning opportunities we will be providing to support our students. And again, what I like to do in June too is just really want to make sure I take a minute to thank our amazing, dedicated, and committed VCS staff for such a successful 21-22 school year. We certainly had our challenges, we all know that, but our staff met those challenges. They finished the year on a high note. Thank you, VCS staff. Your efforts are always inspiring, and I hope you enjoy your summer break. You deserve it. Relax, recharge, and disconnect for a little bit. And also, I'd like to just take a moment to thank our students and our families for the great year we just had. We know that's very important. Their support means everything. We are always better together, so thank you for all the support and commitment to ensuring a successful school year for our students. This community is amazing with the support they provide our school district. Also in your packet, we have provided our first staffing update with the open positions and staff changes that have occurred and will occur in the future. We are certainly in the midst of hiring season, as you can see. We look forward to welcoming new staff to VCS as welcoming current staff to new positions and new buildings. I will continue to provide staffing updates as we work through the hiring process this summer. Very light legislatively in Lansing. Of course, budget talks continue to dominate in Lansing, and I'm looking forward to Steve's report tonight. But just a couple notable updates that have occurred. This past Friday, Governor Whitmer signed House Bill 6012. This bill will provide financial support to help schools implement risk assessments and create critical incident mapping of campuses. There's more details that are going to come out regarding the amounts for schools and districts, and that will be released soon. And once that information is released, I certainly will let you know. And one other note, the talks in Lansing continue regarding the addition of personal finance to the Michigan Merit Curriculum. This has been talks that have went on for quite some time, and for those that know our curriculum, we do offer personal finance at the high school, but it is not a graduation requirement. If this does go in, that would change. There would be some credit changes and some options for students. Stay tuned. If this requirement does pass, it would begin with the incoming freshmen that start their year in 2024, which would give schools ample time to implement and be ready to go if that does actually occur. Also, last but not least, in your packet for your calendars, the board meeting dates for the 22-23 school year are in the packet, and you can ask Amy or let Amy know if you have any questions regarding those dates. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Kevin, where did you end up housing summer school for the elementary? Because that was in flux last we talked.
I'm going to let Gail speak, but I think... Yeah.
And Toby, okay. Okay. Well, I knew that was an issue with all the building projects going on.
Yeah.
I didn't know where you ended up putting it. Okay, good.
Yeah, high school started today, and so high school, a 3-week program. Middle school, I believe, is going to run 6, and then elementary 8.
Oh, wow. Great.
6, excuse me. 6, that's correct. Thank you.
All right, thank you. It'll be so strange to go into an air-conditioned high school.
Yeah.
You never
I
did
think what
think
year
that
that's
would
going to
happen.
be, yeah.
Okay, we'll go on to the budget and finance report. Steve?
Okay, I've got a few things to cover this evening. I'm going to start off here at the board table to cover the first couple of agenda items, and then I'm going to move on, and I'll present on the screen so that everybody can see, and I'll move my computer up to the bistro table up there. So starting with the monthly budget progress report, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. First of all, I've got the proposed amendment for the current year reflected in the far left column. And year-to-date revenue through May 31st, or 11 of our 12 months, total revenue year-to-date, $24.53 million. And, everything's tracking essentially like we'd expect. One thing I'd like to point out is that, local, state, and other revenue is usually you can time that. It's pretty predictable based on when those come in. There's kind of a defined calendar. The federal revenue can be a little bit different based on when grants are awarded, when the budget gets approved, when the reimbursement requests are sent in, and that type of thing. So we're behind where we were at this point last year, but based on everything that we're aware of today, I do expect some significant reimbursement requests really in the next month and a half. So the fact that that's lower than we were at this time last year isn't a reflection of the available revenue, or it doesn't, there's should be really no concern there, okay? On the expenditure side, year-to-date instructional expenditures are at $14,186,333, or about 74%. Of course, that seems kind of weird since, of course, we're talking through May, but the school year is over. But this report is prepared more or less on a cash basis, and teacher contracts and other 10-month employees typically have their pay spread out over July and August. So that's why we see that number lagging, relative to where you might expect it to be for this time of the year. All right. Support services year-to-date, $9.9 million. And then there's a breakdown for athletics, community services, and interfund transfers. And so total expenditures year-to-date, 25.46. And then when you look at the year-to-date percentage compared to last year, and again, this is based on the proposed amendment, you can see that we're at 78.3% year-to-date versus 79.07%. And so I think we're in good shape for the amendment. One thing I'll point out, interfund transfers appear to be over budget at $470,912 versus $395,912. There is, as we go through and close out the year end, there's a transfer from the food service fund back to the general fund, which is budgeted at $75,000, and that's intended to recover indirect costs. And so that is, one of the last entries that we'll post. So even though that appears to be over budget now, fully expect that'll come in at or below the budgeted number. All right. Second page of that report, we've got expenditures by object code, and you can see that total salaries and benefits year to date, $19,714,521. We're about 75% through versus 76.38 for this time period last year. There's a breakdown for purchase services, supplies, capital outlay, and other. And again, total expenditures $25,460,894 out of a total budget of just over $32.5 million. Any questions on that? Okay. Second item I'd like to cover quickly, board members. I included, it's a lot of information. I apologize for that. There's a full investment statement. And just want to point out that, up until very recently, there was very little investment income to be earned by governments and school districts, since we're, regulated based on what we can legally invest in. And so, with interest rates being around zero, we had just been keeping funds invested in basically liquid, liquid investment pools, essentially, or money markets designed for schools and governmental entities. But a couple things happened. We issued Series 2 of the 2020 bond for between 14 and 15 million. At the same time, interest rates started going back up. And if you've been following the bond market, rates they've been going up. And I think, there's going to be a further significant move by the Fed likely this week. And so we took that opportunity to build a portfolio to try to maximize our investment returns, specifically on the bond funds. And so this statement includes activity for the last month, and really since we closed on the bonds. And so I won't go through this in a lot of detail, but just want to point out that, as part of the board's governance, one of the things that you should do is evaluate, be aware of and evaluate how the district invests its funds. And so I'd like to spend just a couple minutes here. You may not be familiar with the Michigan Liquid Asset Fund, or MILAF. That's essentially who we invest with, and we've got a combination of investments through MILAF, and then also some additional investments through PFM, and PFM is sort of the advisory side of MILAF. They're related. And so the Michigan Liquid Asset Fund is I won't get the correct terminology, but it's essentially investment pool authorized by the school code of the state of Michigan and Michigan Public Act 20, which governs the investment of public funds. So these investments include U.S. Treasuries, U.S. government agency-backed securities, money market mutual funds, repurchase agreement, short-term obligations of corporations or commercial paper, and bank debt obligations. So all regulated investments, and there are certain credit requirements and maturities and that type of thing. And that pool is specifically designed to manage all that on behalf of Michigan school districts. Currently, assets in MILAF are about $3.75 billion. It's fully regulated. It's rated by Standard & Poor's. They have a slightly different rating chart for short-term liquid investments, but the fund is rated AAA-M or AAA-M, which is the highest rating by Standard & Poor's, and that rating indicates that the investment pool demonstrates an extremely strong capacity to maintain principal stability and to limit exposure to principal losses due to credit risk. So if you think of a money market, if you're familiar with that, money markets tend to be pegged at $1 per share. And so there are times in, extreme market volatility where that, the underlying value might dip below $1. But this pool is designed to be as safe as any money market out there. And, it would take kind of an extreme credit crisis on, a global scale for something to affect that. But because everything is invested in essentially U.S. government securities, it's about as safe as you can get. All right? Now, in addition to the liquid funds through MILAF, on page, let me go to the document, and so hopefully I can get the right page numbers. But there's a breakdown of, this would be page, I'm not seeing a page number. 28. Let's see, go a little further. So there's a, if you go to page 30 in the board packet, there's a consolidated summary statement. So that statement shows the consolidated investments between the 2020 and the 2022 construction funds. And all of those are bond proceeds. And you can see that, as of the end of May, the total investment value was $20,750,092.91. And you can see the breakdown. There's the MILAF cash management class, which totaled $1.61 million. The MILAF max class, which is $501,000, and then the MyLab term investment. Those are all comprised of those investments that I was referring to. The term investment, so the cash management has daily liquidity. You can put money in one day, take it out the next. The max class provides a little bit higher yield, but that when you transfer money into it, it has to sit for 14 days, so we're still pretty liquid. The term investments act like CDs, so those have maturities typically 0 to 6 months. And then so there are $4.5 million of term investments, and those all mature in the next 6 months. And then the managed account is comprised entirely of U.S. Treasuries. And a couple things, because if you go through this, you see some things, there might be some questions. If you look at so I'm on page 31, there's a consolidated summary statement, and it shows total investments in each of the 2 construction funds. And, there's opening market value, and then there are transactions, and then changes in market value. And that's one thing I just want to talk about real quickly. If you look at it, we purchased $14.053 million in U.S. Treasuries. That's everything in that second line under the 2022 construction fund. And you'll see that as of the end of May, there was a change in market value of a positive $63,821. Because these are marketable securities, there is a change in market value. But all of these securities are intended to be held to maturity. So we really aren't concerned with the day-to-day market fluctuations, and those fluctuations can be significant because the market value changes based on what happens with interest rates. And so at the end of May, we had picked up almost $64,000 in unrealized gains. But I looked Friday, after the close of market Friday, and so the bond markets have been a little bit volatile. And that positive 63 is, as of today, a negative 99, or I should say as of Friday. And tomorrow, it'll be probably much more significant than that because rates are all over the board and they've been ticking up. But again, we are holding these to maturity, and so we really don't have a risk of losing value in the investments, okay? So I just want to make sure people understand that. And I can go deeper into it if that would be helpful or if you have questions, but so the portfolio is designed so that we have maturities essentially every month that line up with what our architects and construction managers anticipate the draw schedule being. And so, we should have no problem from a cash flow standpoint. There should be no scenario where we have to sell a treasury, before maturity and run the risk of, incurring either a gain or a loss, okay? Are there any questions on that?
Since you're holding things to maturity, then you can make some predictions about the yield that you expect, right? So what ballpark are we talking about?
Yeah, so that's actually included, I want to say the yield to maturity based on the cost of what we bought the securities for is 2.78%, all right? Which doesn't sound like a lot, but on those construction funds, that'll generate net of fees between $950,000 and $1 million. And so it's a significant amount of money. Depending on how things play out, hopefully that's conservative. We may do better than that. But, and we really need every dollar of investment income we can get because, inflation has become a major issue with construction. It's been a major issue with everything, but construction, a lot of our initial cost estimates have been kind of blown out of the water because costs have just been going up so rapidly. All right, so, yep.
And so there's a breakdown of every individual treasury, and, you know, I could, again, go deeper, but, you know, you can, I guess to quickly demonstrate the point on the market, or it's referred to as interest rate risk, where changes in interest rates can change the value of the securities. Because we hold to maturity, we should not have any issues with that. But, you know, to get to that yield to maturity of 2.78, if you look at the portfolio, it might be confusing because we've got treasuries that were issued in, say, I'm just looking at one here, that was issued in August of 2020 that has a coupon rate of 0.25%. Well, our yield to maturity on that specifically is 2.95%. And how you get there is we bought those treasuries at a significant discount. So somebody that didn't hold it to maturity sold it, you know, so the par value of the investment is $685,000 for that treasury, and the district paid $627,000 for it. So we'll earn interest and receive interest payments semi-annually at 0.25%, but when it matures, that's when the district will receive the majority of the revenue on that particular treasury, if that makes sense. Because it will mature at $685,000. We paid $627,000 for it. Okay? Does that make sense? All right.
But we're not going to, I mean, if there's an opportunity, the bond market goes way up, there's no plan, because that would, I would think, take somebody really being on top of that to say, oh, let's take advantage of that. If we're above a certain, let's sell it early because we can.
The problem with that is that now you're out of the market and you may have gained, but you still want to earn interest.
Yeah.
And, you know, my financial advisor tells me constantly,
Right.
Don't try to time the market, don't try to time the market. And,
Right.
you know, so we're not, and nor should a school district or, you know, a local government be involved in actively trading securities to make money, because
Right.
you may end up losing money over time and losing out on potential interest income. So, all right. Questions? All right. Okay, now the fun part, and I'm going to move up here, and we're going to go through the budget presentation. So, I know there's some fairly strong weather coming in. I'm trying to move along as quickly as I can. And now would be a good time to, no, you're fine. Try to double down on your caffeine intake. You know, try as I might, I just can't. I'm just not, being an introvert and an accountant, these presentations they can be kind of painful, and I get that. Nevertheless, it's important information, and so I want to go through this.
You just told us how you made almost $1 million. That's exciting.
I don't take credit for that, but. Okay, so 22-23 budget hearing. Few things we want to accomplish here tonight. I don't know if hopefully the mic is picking me up for the stream.
Sounds good.
All right. So first of all, we want to, this is an opportunity to communicate with our entire school community, the public, the board, administration, and staff. We want to talk about major factors affecting the current year budget, and then the primary assumptions used in developing the proposed budget for next year. And then after that, we're going to go through. I'm going to keep it at a pretty high level because there's a tremendous amount of detail behind the numbers. I'm happy to answer questions, but if we want to get really deep into the details, that might be better served at a kind of a separate discussion. We also have some compliance to take care of here with the Uniform Budgeting and Accounting Act, Truth in Budgeting, and also the Open Meetings Act. So starting, so those are the objectives. Now what we're going to do, I'm going to talk about 2021-22 budget, 22-23, make a few comments on fund balance, and then we'll conduct the hearing, and then we'll be on our way. So this is a significant budget amendment. I'd say this is the largest budget amendment in my time here. The good news is the net combination or the net effect of all the changes is positive, and we'll talk about the bottom line in that in just a minute. You know, I always try to talk about what the assumptions are and kind of, you know, what the risks and uncertainties are as we head into a new year. And last year, you know, the big assumptions are always based on enrollment and funding, per pupil funding, but also there has been a lot more uncertainty with regard to the pandemic, which I know nobody really wants to talk about, but the financial impact of that, the federal funding that goes along with that. And so it's really been kind of a crazy couple of years from a budgetary standpoint. But looking at the revenue side for 21-22, we had projected, blended pupil count of 2620, and we came in at 2630. So at what was budgeted at that time, 8211 per kid, that generated an additional 82,000. So not a huge variance, but I wanted to point that out. We were within 10 on the projection. The per pupil foundation, actual versus projected, is a huge adjustment. We knew going into the summer last year that there were a range of proposals out there, and what most districts went with was a flat $100 per pupil increase, and that's what we went with. We knew that that was hopefully conservative, and it turned out that it was really conservative. And so our foundation actually came in at 8,700. All right, so that was a significant increase. That generated not quite 1.3 million in additional state aid. MIPSers, you know, retirement is a huge budget item for the district, and we do receive some revenue from the state to partially offset that. And so there was an increase in MIPSers related revenue of 302,000. Now, when I get to the expenditures, you'll see that that was largely a wash, but you know, nevertheless, it's baked in there. We had additional state categorical grants that came in higher than expected at 165,000. So categoricals would be all those different line items that the state gives us money for outside of the normal per pupil foundation. So they tend to come with more strings attached, and they're, you know, dedicated for a specific purpose. So those came in a bit higher than expected. Typically, when categoricals increase, that means expenditures increase because that money is, you know, tied to a specific purpose. Federal funding was the big one. We knew that there would be some ESSER 2 and 3 money that would become available. We didn't, at that time though, there was kind of a logjam in the legislature, and we weren't sure exactly what that was going to look like, how much we would get. And so we stated last year when we adopted the budget that we were sort of eliminating the effect of that at that time. And so, but as it turns out, oops, I got to stop clicking. We estimate this year that we're going to get about 1.6 million in ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. All right, so again, a big increase. And then consortium revenue, or revenue really that comes through KRESA for education for employment, education for the arts, special education, as well as the enhancement millage, came in about 250,000 higher than expected. And some of that, you know, as costs go up, you know, the reimbursement that goes along with that goes up as well. We had 50,000 of just kind of changes throughout the revenue budget. You know, that's pretty negligible amount in relation to the total, but I included it in there. Just everything from kids club revenue to athletic gate receipts to investment income to just all those types of things. And then we had anticipated issuing a bus note for the purchase of buses last year, but as it became evident that our financial position had improved significantly, we made the decision to purchase those outright and not incur the borrowing costs. So it's more complicated than going to the car dealership and signing a loan. There are legal fees involved, and then obviously there's the interest expense and that type of thing. So we didn't do that. And it's not really revenue, but it is considered an other financing source. All right? So it shows up similar to a revenue. So the net increase in revenues for the current year increased by just over $3.2 million. Any questions on that? All right, moving on. Again, 21-22 expenditures. Employee compensation costs went up significantly. And that's not a surprise. We knew that hazard pay would be a significant item last year as well as the year before that. And that, including FICA and retirement, was about $680,000. We added a couple positions. We had new labor agreements with VESPA and VPA, and both of those, rightfully so, included pretty significant increases to compensation. We had health and other benefits that increased by $243,000, and that was so health participation, was up. Dental, dental is one where I think there was kind of a lag between, a lot of people weren't going to the dentist when everything was shut down, and so there was kind of a catch-up phase where, people were getting caught up on that, and you see that in the premiums. There's some retirement incentive payments that are spelled out in collective bargaining agreement and that type of thing. Purchase services went up by $676,000. And this is really, when we look at purchase services and supplies, there's a couple things going on. A lot of inflation. There's also, to some degree, we're getting caught up with things that, we had a lot of purchase orders at the end of last year that, because of, even at that time, there were supply chain issues, and so things were not coming in. We added, when I think about purchase services, we had some permanent subs through EduStaff. We had a lot more conferences. We had a lot more activity than, we've had for, the prior couple of years, as well as, increasing rates, sub-rates across the board, some additional custodial, and trying to raise those rates so that, GRBS can hire the staff. There was just a tremendous amount of added cost there. Supplies, same thing. We had a lot of increases across the board. Bus fuel was a big thing. On the instructional side, there were some, purchase of curriculum materials that typically would have been spread out over a couple of years, but, Gail and Sandra talked to the vendor, and we were able to get, I think, a 5% discount if we just paid everything up front, and we took advantage of that. So that accelerated some of the supply purchases that would have otherwise been delayed a little bit. And then capital outlay and other expenditures increased by $41,000. And so the total increase in budgeted expenditures was just about $2.6 million. All right? And then to look at the kind of the net effect of all that, you can see we have 2021 actual. We had the adopted for 21-22, and I've got the changes. And then on the far right, we've got the proposed amendment. So we end up with total revenues and other financing sources, $32,926,660. Expenditures and transfers at $32,518,602. When we started the year, we adopted a budget that showed a shortfall of $203,000. And based on these budget revisions, that improves by $605,000. And so as of right now, we're looking at a net increase to fund equity of $402,000. All right? That would take fund equity from 4.94 million to 5.34 million. We're going to talk about fund balance a little bit more in a bit, but there's different ways to look at fund balance. But I tend to look at it, or one of the ways I look at it, is to express it as a percentage, your beginning fund balance as a percentage of your current year operating expenditures. Because that fund balance is, those are kind of the first dollars that you have available to finance your operations. And so we've made some meaningful improvements here. At the end of 2020, 2021, we're at 11.1%. Based on when we adopted the budget, based on the final results of the 2021 year, we were at 15.8%. And then, based on this amendment, we would be at 15.2%. So might be counterintuitive because we're increasing fund equity by $400,000, but our budget also increased. So even though we're increasing, the budget increased more in proportion to fund balance. So instead of being at 15.8%, it's really 15.2%. All right? Still a healthy level of fund balance. All right? Any questions on the amendment?
What was the lowest we were flirting with less than 10% at one point.
Yep, absolutely. And I can go into that now, but I do have a slide on that in a little bit.
Because I remember we were scared to death we were ever going to get it back up. So.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Is it okay if I keep going and then come back to that?
Or John.
All right. Any other? Okay. All right. Big assumptions for 22-23. Enrollment, I'm budgeting based on 2610. And so, hopefully that's a little bit conservative, but I'm budgeting based on a reduction of 20. It's, again, counterintuitive when you think about all the development that's been happening across the district, subdivision after subdivision and new subdivisions. And yet, and I didn't include it because I was trying to keep it a little bit brief, when you look at our enrollment over time, it's flat to declining, and that's not a reflection of how people view the school district. It's demographics. People are waiting longer to have kids. People are having fewer kids, and I'm probably not a great example, but for instance, Katie and I was 40 when we had our first kid, and I think you see that more and more, and just fewer kids and later in life. And so despite, every time we see a subdivision go in, the initial reaction is to say, oh my God, we got to build a school, we're going to be bursting at the seams. But those numbers, when I started in 2003, we were closer to 2,800. And today, we're at 2,630, and even that 2,630 is a little bit misleading because that includes pathways at, around 100 to 110. We have the virtual partnership that has another, 60, 70 kids. So, if you think about just our core K-12 enrollment, it's been going down.
Think where we might have been without the development.
Absolutely.
Could have had to close a building maybe.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, don't pick on Centennial. We're bringing in the kids.
Yep. So, all right. So moving on, per pupil funding. I'm assuming an increase of $435, which is 5%, which would take the per pupil foundation up to $9,135. Hopefully, this is a little bit conservative. That is based on the governor's proposal, and the House and Senate both have proposals that are higher than that. Revenues have been very strong. There's certainly money in the school aid fund to support a higher foundation allowance. And I think on the one hand, it's an election year, and we'll see some good movement. But on the other hand, there's going to be a lot of pressure for tax cuts and that kind of thing. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit too. But so hopefully enrollment is a little bit conservative, and hopefully per pupil funding is a little bit conservative. All right. On the expenditure side, if you look at, Employee compensation globally across the board, I'm expecting that that will go up about 2/3 or about 2.5%. And so, you know, there are a lot of things that go into that. And so that's my best guess today based on our current staffing and staff changes that I know about. We do have our collective bargaining agreement with VEA is in effect for one more year. VESPA's agreement expires at the end of this month, so we'll be negotiating that. And then VPA has, their contract goes through 24, but there's a provision in there to kind of peg their compensation levels to changes in the foundation allowance. So that one will be more of a formula, but we will have to sit down and negotiate with VESPA. And then, you know, there are always changes that happen, additional staff members here, you know, different changes where an unexpected departure, and now we need to fill that. Sometimes those result in savings, and sometimes they add additional cost. But, you know, as of today, again, expecting kind of a net increase of 2.5%. Non-compensation expenditures expected to be about $5.81 million, and that's a net reduction of almost $600,000. But that net reduction is because we just in May made the final installment on 2016 refunding bonds, which were general obligation bonds. They're not funded by a debt retirement levy. Those bonds dated back to the stadium and some mechanical upgrades at Toby at that time. And so that totaled about, on an annual basis, about $470,000. All right, and then capital outlay, because we had such a large purchase of school buses, I expect capital outlay to go down by close to $500,000. So we're looking at about $1 million of a couple items that fall off. And then we know there's going to be significant inflation, particularly with bus fuel, natural gas, maybe not quite as much with electricity, but fuel and, you know, bus fuel and natural gas are huge. But we see it with paper, we see it with everything. You know, we see it with the cost of service calls. You know, I mean, the costs of everything are going up at a ridiculous rate. And I think we all see that ourselves, but it's, you know, just as bad, if not worse, for a school district, you know. So those are some of the things that we have to deal with. However, looking at projected revenues, total projected revenues for next year, you know, based on those big assumptions, would be $33.3 million. And of the 33.3, I'd like to, you can see that it's broken down between local revenue, which would be property taxes, gate receipts, kids club, you know, summer activities, all those different things. State revenue, which is $26.54 million. Federal, you know, I'm expecting another significant amount of federal aid for next year that we'll be able to recognize at $1.35 million. And then other, those consortium programs through KRESA, and primarily special ed and the enhancement millage at $2.78 million. The table below just demonstrates that the foundation allowance is $23.8 million based on $91.35 per kid and 2,610 kids. And then the first dollars from that come from the non-homestead operating millage, which our voters graciously approved last month as well. And, you know, based on increasing taxable values, expect that, based on tax values as they stand today, that would be $2,243,000. So the state aid portion is basically 21.6. All right. The difference between the state figure up above, 26.5, and 21.6, that's allocated specifically to state aid, is, you know, relates to all those other categoricals, and a big chunk of that would be probably $2.75 million of mixers related revenue, but then you've got at-risk, special education, and those types of things. All right. And you can see that the foundation allowance generates about 70, just not quite 77% of our overall revenue. So it's, that those big assumptions, enrollment and per pupil funding, have a big effect on the budget. Projected expenditures by function. And so I've broken this down. You can see instructional expenditures at $19.8 million. And then below that, basic programs, or those things that happen, day to day in the, typical classroom, 16.2, and then added needs, which would be, compensatory ed, at risk, all those things to help, our students that are at risk, and special education and everything else. That includes EFE, would be not quite 3.6 million. Support services, projected to be at 11,735,240. And so I've broken down that a couple of ways. Even though those aren't dollars directly related to day-to-day classroom, there's still a lot of pupil support, instructional support, building administration, so the principal's offices and everything else, all those things that may not account for a specific classroom, but an awful lot of support that's directly related to the services we provide our students at not quite 5 million. And then general administration, business services, central services, so that, central services would include technology, human resources, pupil counting, district-wide communications, those types of things. They're at 2.15 million. Facilities and transportation at 4.62 million. And then other expenditures would be at 1,062,000. And that's really made up of athletics and community services. And then the interfund, you see there, a negative 75,000, which represents an incoming transfer from the food service fund. So total expenditures projected to be 32,597,120. All right, questions? Still awake, or have I lost anybody? Sorry. All right, so here's just another breakdown of expenditures by object. Again, that total is just about 32.6, but you can see that salaries and benefits are projected to consume just over 82%. So it's a big line item. That's one of those things that there's different opinions on what's the right level and how much is too much, and it's one of those things that you have to kind of manage. I would say if I talk to a lot of my colleagues in other districts, if I talk to MSBO, they might say 82% seems awfully high. But I think one of the things that's different for Vicksburg is that we have kind of a structured, planned out bond program where we started in 2014 with a bond. We went to 2020, issued a bond. We expect to go for another bond in 2026. So we've got a stable source of funding for a lot of our facility needs, our technology needs, and those types of things. So the 82.2 on the surface is a little bit high, but I think there's a mitigating factor that makes it so it's workable. So total compensation, $26,783,000. Purchase services expected to be right around 3.2. Supplies just about 2.15 million. Capital outlay, there's still things that the bond project doesn't provide for, and so I'm projecting about 290,000 of capital outlay out of the general fund. And then other expenditures of 184,725. And that amount would include, it would be much higher if we still had a bond payment to fund out of the general fund. But that is going to include payments for like dual enrollment, things that don't fit into, they don't meet the definition of purchase services or supplies or employee compensation. But a lot of times they're payments to other school districts for various things, all right? And so, if you look at this chart, which is similar to one that I covered with the amendment for the current year, I still show the 2021 actual, the 21-22 adopted and amended, and then the proposed. And you can see here the condition, the financial condition continues to look good. Total revenue projected at $33,344,723. Total expenditures, $32,597,000, and the deficiency, or the excess in this case, the excess of revenue over expenditures is, as of today, expected to be right around $750,000. And that would take our fund balance from $5.3 million projected at the end of this year to almost $6.9 million, or $6.1 million, $6.09 million. And again, looking at the beginning projected fund balance as a percentage of next year's budget, you know, you can see that it looks a little bit better at 16.4%. All right? This is a lot different than a lot of the budgets, you know, for the first 16 years or 17 years of my career here. And so, you know, I'm pleased to be able to present something that continues to show a strengthening financial condition. But I feel like it's important to put a little bit of perspective. Dave asked about fund balance. And so this graph dates back to '04, and so there's a few things going on here. The bars indicate the absolute value of fund balance as of June 30th of each year. The line portion of the graph represents fund balance, again, as that beginning fund balance as a percentage of that year's expenditures. And wow, you know, if we end up at 6.1 million, that's a lot more fund balance than this district has ever had. There's no doubt about that. And I think as any of us as individuals, that sounds like a lot of money. And it is a lot of money. But to keep it into perspective, you know, we're just now really getting back to where we were in the early 2000s. And so back here, you know, this is coming out of the good years of Proposal A, when there was a lot of catch-up. And then if we think back to what happened, you know, there was the economy became very sketchy, and things became very difficult, and revenues were not keeping pace with expenditures. And you see that in a period of 4 or 5 years, we cut our fund equity in half. And Dave, we were below 10%. We were actually just, I think, I don't see it on here, but I want to say it was like 8.8%. And that's, you know, that's not a position you want to be in. You're just a few percentage points away from getting some very close attention from the state of Michigan. And you can just be in a very difficult situation. And I think what I really want to impress on people is that happened very rapidly. You know, that happened within just a few years. And there were some other things that happened in there, like an enrollment, you know, unexpected enrollment decline, you know, mid-year prorations. We had a proration once or twice that actually came in after the end of the fiscal year, when you have literally no ability to modify your budget because everything's done at that point. So I don't want to overstate that, but I just want to point out that we're getting back to roughly where we were. If you go based on recommendations, MSBO would recommend 15 to 20%. And we've experienced these things. You know, if you don't have sufficient fund equity, then, you know, you incur more money to borrow, whether it's for buses or even state aid notes, which we were doing annually for quite a few years.
But Steve, even if you look at the classroom level, because we had that fund equity when we went from 2006 to 2009, we didn't close classrooms and move kids mid-year because we had to cut expenses. And that allowed us, it was scary, but it allowed us not to interrupt kids' education,
Yes.
which is what we're really about.
Yeah.
And so that made a key difference, and yeah, I was a little nervous thinking, could you ever get it back up? So,
Right, and that's why I say
because it'll happen again.
it will.
Yeah,
You know,
that's
fund
guaranteed.
balance, having an adequate fund balance or a healthy fund balance gives you flexibility. So when those things happen, you can take a more measured approach. You can be a little bit more reflective. You can be a little bit more strategic. There were, at that time, there were schools that were starting the school year and laying off significant numbers of teachers because
Right.
we're talking in the, the third week of school, and people are being let go, and that, we want to avoid that, And so, any other questions on that? I think the key is, it's a lot of money, but it gets us back to roughly where we were, and if nothing else, then I'll kind of move on to the risks and uncertainties, and I think this makes sense after talking a little bit about fund equity. So the uncertainties, to me, things, these first 3 bullet points are things that are shorter term, more immediate uncertainty, but we won't know until the information becomes available, so we don't know what actual enrollment will be. I think this is one where there's more upside potential than downside, but we've been surprised before. The per pupil funding, I think there's more upside than downside potential here. The 435 is significant, but even if we think about inflation and what we've all experienced, and you consider that inflation's at a 40-year high based on the most recent report, a 5% increase in funding doesn't really keep pace with a lot of the expenses. All right, which leads me, so hopefully that will come in better than expected. Another uncertainty that I think is nearer term is continued inflation. And, this is one where I think there's more downside potential than upside potential, frankly. Bus fuel is up significantly. Filled up your car recently? And you think our buses, drive 350 to 400,000 miles a year, and they get maybe 7 miles to the gallon. We're talking about a significant amount of money here. Natural gas. We had locked in natural gas at around $2 per 1,000 cubic feet or MCF. And we had locked it in for several years, and that expires at the end of July. Well, rates today, natural gas on the spot market is around $9 per MCF. So we're going to certainly take a hit on that. I've built in some contingency, and I think that will be fine, but it's just one of those things. There's a risk. I think there's a very real risk of a recession. I think all the warning signs are there. I can't say for sure that'll happen or when it'll happen, but more and more experts are suggesting that in the next 12 to 24 months there could be a recession, and it could be significant. And of course, Michigan tends to take a hit from recessions more than most other states. And so, the good news is there tends to be kind of a 12 or 18-month lag between a recession and when the slowdown starts to hit government coffers. So we have some time, but, I would suggest that now is the time to make sure that the district is prepared. Finally, a lot of the increase in fund equity is related to the federal funding. And, and it's been huge. And that is going to go away. There may be, there's still a significant amount of funding available. We have about 2 years to take advantage of it. And after that, it's gone. And so when that money goes away, to the extent we've used it to build in recurring costs, like positions or personnel, you cause an immediate structural imbalance in the budget. So we have to be very, very careful to not, go overboard even if you use that to, you know, increase salaries across the board, well, those salaries are going to continue. And so it's just something to be aware of. So the kind of my bottom line message is, again, now it's time to ensure that the district's prepared for the next downturn. Doesn't mean that we, you know, shouldn't keep investing to make the district stronger and make the program stronger and do everything that we can for our students and staff. But we've got to be, I think, more than ever, we're going to have to be very deliberate and very strategic and not become complacent and not make a lot of spending decisions just because the money is there. All right, so that's kind of the end of what I wanted to cover as far as the budget. We've got the tax hearing to conduct, but before we move into that, are there any questions or comments or concerns? It's a lot of information. If you don't deal with it every day, it's confusing, and I get that. But if there are questions, I'd be happy to entertain them.
Has there been any movement in Lansing? I forgot the name of that report that came out about school financing and talking about at-risk kids are more expensive to educate, and then they talked about a transportation piece of that as well, that rural districts have to spend more. Is there any movement on doing, you know, other than just the foundation allowance, to have anything that might help mitigate fuel costs, that kind of thing?
Well, if you really break down the House proposal and the Senate and Governor Whitmer, some of those contain some of those categoricals, I would call them.
Okay.
Others just put it all into one lump.
Okay.
But I couldn't agree more. There's still plenty of inequities out there, especially in districts that have aging infrastructure that cannot produce as much dollar per mill as more lucrative districts, for sure. If you look in your packet too, the consensus is in there. If you want to read through that, you'll see some of the categoricals in there. Yep.
Any other questions for Steve? This is a public hearing to consider our district's 22-23 budgets and property tax millage rate. And we will open that public hearing for comments from anyone. Hearing none, we'll close the hearing.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Steve.
Thank you very much, and thanks for enduring.
It was very informative.
As you said, that's a lot of good news in there, Steve.
There.
Yeah, it's been, a long time. Well, really, an entire career almost of, oh my God, where are we going to cut? And so it's good to be in this position.
Well, one of the things that I really appreciate that our superintendent and assistant superintendent have done is when money was tight, I thought it was just brilliant to do the bonds that you've done over time, because it's taken some things really out of the general fund, which has allowed us to pay people, you know, and so to have technology, to have a lot of that money come out of bond money so that we know, because that's going to be the first thing that's going to get cut, and you got to keep that current.
Right.
Or some of these other things that normally would be in the general fund, to reduce those pressures on the general fund, I thought was, and to structure it that way and to have a way going forward that's sustainable, has been very, a lot of foresight to do that, and I think has made a big, big difference for us.
Well, appreciate that, and just to piggyback, you know, we every time we issue bonds now, the repayment schedule is designed so that every 6 years, and there could, we could flex that a little bit either way, that, there's the debt service requirements drop, and it creates that opportunity to go for another bond issue without having to raise the millage.
Right.
So, that is expected to happen in 2026, and, taxable values have been increasing at a decent rate, and so we're right on schedule to be able to do that.
Okay, we'll go on to section 98B, goal progress report, Scale.
Yeah. No. No. Understand.
There you go.
There we go. All right. All right, good evening. You have in your packet the Section 98 practice report that we are required to share with you for Michigan Department of Education. And as Kevin says, and we've all heard, all means all. And when you review this data, we are not there yet in all of our grade levels or all of our buildings, but we are hitting that goal in some. As I've mentioned before, we convene 3 times a year to analyze our student achievement data as a K-12 district team, and that is the data that you typically see in presentation at the board meetings at our buildings, or where we hold the building reports at our board meetings. On June 2nd, we came together in this room for our 3rd district data review, and we analyzed student achievement trend data for the last 4 years. And we engaged in robust discussion and action planning to determine how to sustain those things that we were achieving at the desired level and what we needed to do differently in those areas that we were not achieving where we want to be. So if you have questions specifically about the data, or if you'd like to know more about the data we look at during our district data reviews, I'd be happy to meet with you. Just schedule a time to talk with you about that. Other than that, what questions might you have about the data?
I guess one of the things that I always wonder about when you give the data in percentage, obviously every group has a different number of students.
Mm-hmm.
So I always wonder, does that mean 1 student or 2 students, or does that mean 10 students?
Well, it has to be more than 30 or it's not in there.
But we still really don't.
Right.
At least I don't know the actual number of students that
Yes.
are not achieving.
Yeah.
And so obviously that affects how we do our programming.
We do look at that during our district data reviews. So along with the percents, we have our student numbers over here so that we can tell, because we don't obviously squish the numbers if it's less than 30 during our district data review. We keep all of that in there. But yeah, we're very mindful of if it's 2 students or more students.
But I guess from an outsider's standpoint, I look at it and I go, gosh, does that mean 15 people didn't make it? Or does that mean
Right.
3?
Yeah. So we could
So-
look at how we report that in the
When you
future,
have to
sure.
work with correcting those things,
Mhm.
obviously it makes a huge difference than actual number.
Yeah.
And when you look at the reporting requirements of this law, that's why we present it the way we do.
Right.
We could bring a stack of information to this.
Right here.
Yeah. And we can
There
even
you
go
go.
deeper than that if we want.
Yeah, well, never mind,
Yeah.
Yeah.
especially during the budget meeting.
Yeah. I could make the PowerPoint. Yeah, no.
No, but it's just one of the things
know you
that
would.
I always look at it and think, actually, most of our percentages look really good, but when the ones that are a little bit lower, I always wonder, what is it really mean?
Well, and who are those students? And what have we done for them? Where are they in the...
My question is, did any of this surprise you? Are there any surprises to you in here that you're seeing, looking at the results?
I don't know about surprising, discouraging. I mean, you always would like to see, particularly at the middle school. And so we spent a lot of time on June 2nd just looking at, when you're looking at numbers like that, you have to look at your core instruction as well as your intervention. And so Our action plan includes looking at who parents opt out of intervention. So, you know, do we change the guidelines for that? Are we providing our teachers with enough professional learning to use the resources that they have well? How can we increase and enhance the coaching to support our teachers in using that? So when you have numbers like that, it's core, which in the classroom, as well as all of our intervention services. Is that Rain?
Yes. Thank you.
Any other questions for Gail? Okay. Doesn't appear we have anybody that wishes to address the board on a non-agenda item. Is that correct? Okay. We'll go on to board action required. First item is the approval of the May 9th, 2022 board meeting minutes. We'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Dave,
Support.
supported by Stephanie. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item B, approval of general fund invoices totaling $281,529.63. Moved by Carol, supported by Jennifer, is that right? Or was it Tina? Okay. Discussion? Okay, Stephanie?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Tina? Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries. Approval of purchase card disbursements for April 2022 totaling $163,065.07. Moved by Tina,
Support.
supported by Jennifer. Discussion? Stephanie?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries. Approval to amend the 2020, or the 21-22 budgets and adopt the appropriations resolution for 22-23 budgets for the following funds: general funds, special revenue funds, debt retirement funds, and building and site funds.
Move approval.
Moved by Dan,
Support.
supported by Stephanie. Discussion? Stephanie?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries. Approval of the truth in budget on the proposed property tax millage rate for 22-23 school year.
Move approval.
Moved by Tina, supported by Carol. Discussion? Stephanie?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol? And yes, motion carries. Second reading, approval for the award the 22-23 dairy bid to Cedar Crest Dairy in the amount of $94,146.32. Moved by Carol,
Support.
supported by Jennifer. Discussion? Stephanie?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries. Second reading, approval of the AP Calculus curriculum proposal.
Support.
Moved by Tina, supported by Dave.
Everybody.
Everybody, yeah. Discussion? Stephanie?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries. H, approval to renew membership to the Vicksburg High School, Vicksburg Middle School, and Michigan High School Athletic Association from April 1, 2022.
August. So moved.
Pardon me?
You got the date wrong.
August.
Oh, did I? Oh, August, what did I say, April?
April.
Through July 31st, 2023.
You
So
were just
moved.
checking to see if we were gonna approve it, right?
3 times a charm.
I had a rough
Move
week.
approval.
I had a rough weekend.
Support.
Okay, we got a motion and a support. Okay, Stephanie,
Yes.
Dan,
Yes.
Dave,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Tina, and Carol.
Yes.
Okay, approval of following staff resignations. And we'll take resignations 1 through 5 under I.
Move approval.
Moved by Tina,
Support. Dave.
supported by Dave. Discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Approval of tenure for the following teachers. Being the weather is coming in, with the board's permission, we'll take 1 through 10 together.
I did notice for under 7 for Josh Noble, he is quitting, so I don't know if
Yeah,
that needs
he's-
to be taken
he's-
off of approval for. Oh, yeah.
Does that
Hmm?
affect, does that affect their future
Yeah.
jobs if they go and get a different job, they still?
Retain that tenure. That's tenure earned from this past year.
Yes, I think we need to.
So
leave
we
that.
need to keep,
Recommend the
we need to include them.
Okay, I just
Yeah.
want to make sure that was okay.
No, that's fine.
Okay, do we have a motion?
Yes. So moved, sorry.
Okay, supported by Tina. Discussion? Stephanie?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Tina? Carol? Yes, motion carries, and that will stand adjourned before the tornado hits.